He unlocked his front door, expecting silence. But what he found inside shattered everything he thought he knew about strength, power, and kindness. The key stuck for half a second in the lock, and that tiny delay felt like the longest moment of Ethan Cole's life, because every evening lately came with the same silent prayer that tonight his apartment would feel a little less heavy. He pushed the door open and froze, breath catching in his chest, as the soft clink of porcelain echoed from the kitchen. The smell of lemon soap drifted toward him, clean and unexpected, and there, standing at his sink with her sleeves rolled up and her hair loosely tied back, was the last person he ever imagined would be in his home. Margaret Hale, the powerful CEO of the company where he worked, the woman whose name alone made boardrooms go quiet. She was washing dishes. His dishes. For a moment, Ethan thought exhaustion had finally tipped him into hallucination, because this was the same woman who signed seven-figure contracts before lunch, who never forgot a name, who never showed weakness. And yet here she was, carefully drying a chipped plate that had once belonged to his late wife. Ethan dropped his bag, the sound thudding against the floor, and Margaret turned, her eyes widening just enough to show she hadn't expected him yet. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, setting the plate down as if it were fragile glass. "I should have waited to explain." Ethan couldn't speak. His throat closed, memories and questions crashing together like waves. He had left work early that day after another call from his son's school, another reminder that being a single father meant constantly choosing which part of his life to disappoint. He had tried to hide it at work, tried to be the reliable employee, the grateful one who never complained. Margaret had noticed anyway. She always did. As Ethan stood there, his eyes moved around the kitchen, the counter wiped clean, the trash taken out, the stack of bills neatly aligned by the fridge. It felt like someone had gently stepped into his chaos and brought order without asking, "Why are you here?" He finally managed, his voice rough. Margaret took a breath, the kind people take before admitting something they've carried too long. She told him she'd seen his file, not the professional one, but the human one, the missed promotions because he couldn't relocate, the late nights logged after his son fell asleep, the sick days that weren't really sick days. She told him she'd recognized the look in his eyes because she'd worn it once herself, years ago when she was a young mother pretending she had it all together, while everything quietly fell apart. Ethan listened, heart pounding, as she explained she hadn't come as his boss, but as someone who understood what it meant to drown in responsibility, with no one to throw you a rope. He wanted to be angry, embarrassed even, but instead a strange warmth spread through him, mingled with grief. When Margaret gently mentioned his wife, how she'd read the brief note in his emergency contact form, Ethan's composure cracked. Tears blurred his vision, not loud or dramatic, just heavy and unstoppable. No one had said her name out loud in months. No one at work knew the full story. Margaret didn't move closer. She simply stood there, giving him space, respect, dignity. In that quiet kitchen, with clean dishes and an open heart, Ethan felt something shift. He realized this wasn't pity. This was kindness, rare, deliberate, and brave. And as the camera of your imagination lingers on that moment, remember that stories like this remind us why empathy matters. If this kind of story touches you, if you believe in human connections that change lives, this is your moment to support the channel. Subscribe, because every story shared here is meant to restore a little faith where it's been worn thin. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug Margaret had filled with fresh coffee, the steam rising like a promise of warmth after a long winter. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a quiet conversation that felt heavier than any meeting he'd ever attended. Margaret spoke softly, telling him how after her husband died years ago, she'd buried herself in work, convinced strength meant silence. She admitted she'd nearly lost her own daughter that way, not physically, but emotionally, until a stranger once showed her unexpected kindness, stepping in when she didn't know how to ask for help. That moment, she said, changed the course of her life, and she'd vowed never to ignore that look in someone else's eyes again. Ethan listened, tears threatening again, not from pain this time, but from relief. He confessed how hard it had been, how every day felt like a balancing act on a fraying rope, how his son tried to be brave but still cried at night, asking when Mom was coming back. Margaret didn't offer solutions right away. She offered understanding. Then gently, she laid out what she'd really come to do. She told him his job was safe, not out of charity, but because his dedication was undeniable. She offered flexible hours, remote days, and support programs the company had but rarely talked about. More than that, she told him she wanted to create a culture where people like him didn't have to suffer in silence, and she wanted his help to do it. Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope without fear. When Margaret finally stood to leave, she paused at the door and said something that would stay with him forever. That strength wasn't about carrying everything alone, but about letting others carry some of the weight when they offer. After she left, Ethan sat in the quiet apartment, sunlight reflecting off clean countertops, and realized this day would become a turning point. A story he'd one day tell his son about how compassion can arrive when you least expect it. Weeks later, life wasn't magically perfect, but it was lighter. He smiled more. His son laughed louder. And at work, Ethan wasn't just surviving, he was contributing, growing, and helping shape a workplace where humanity mattered. Stories like this exist to remind us that kindness at the right moment can change everything. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you see the world a little differently, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel because every subscription helps us share more real, emotional stories that uplift, motivate, and remind us all that even in the hardest moments, someone can step in and everything can change.